wassalatu wassalamu ala khairul mursaleen ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'd. Continuing on from last week, a short recap of last week was I looked at the advent of World War I and how the Treaty of Versailles, which signaled the end of what was called the war to end all wars, how it has affected world peace and definitely peace in the Middle East up until now. And in the course of that, we looked at the creation of the State of Israel and how it came about, which took us through a little bit of World War II, which we'll go back and see.
Assalamualaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. You know, and to look at what was there, you know, how in 1948 by UN decree, the State of Israel was created, and events that happened post that. It'll be something that at different points in time we'll take a look at because of its importance. But today, we want to take a look at the House of Saud. Okay, the House of Saud. Because the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia wasn't always the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There was no Saudi Arabia in the Arab Peninsula. You know, the Arab Peninsula was, when you look at it, is divided up amongst several different nations. You have Yemen, you have the Gulf states of, you know, what becomes the Emirates, United Arab Emirates, and we'll talk about them as well. You know, how did the Emirates come about? You know, how did, you know, this UAE, the United Arab Emirates, what was it before that? And who controlled it? You know, the seven, as they would say, sheikdoms or small kingdoms that make up what is the United Arab Emirates now, with Dubai being, you know, one of the financial capitals of the world, and, you know, having the importance in business circles and elsewhere that's beyond the size of, in terms of square miles of the country itself. Okay, so at one time you have the United Arab Emirates, and then you have these seven individual fiefdoms or sheikdoms, all under the control of members of the same family. Okay, with Abu Dhabi being the seat of the United Arab Emirates, and we'll get into talking about that at a later date. But on the Arabian Peninsula, so you had Kuwait. Kuwait wasn't always a country. In the 19th century, 17th century, 18th century, Kuwait was simply Kuwait City. And the boundaries of the city grew to the extent that its royal family declared Kuwait as a country. And we'll talk about how that came about, okay? And as well, you have Bahrain, okay, that is right next door to what is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. You have Qatar, which is another one of the Gulf states, okay, in this area called the Middle East. And if you expand it, you bring in some more countries: Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and the non-Arab entity of Iran. And we're going to take a close look at them because there are things going on in the world concerning Iran that we need to know and understand. But today, and this will be interactive, we're going to look at the House of Al Saud. You know, how did the Saud family become entrenched in being that part of the Arabian Peninsula, the Nejd and the Hijaz, which makes up most of the country? How did this come about having the name instead of it being, you know, being Saudi Arabia? How is it? What did the Saud family do that allowed them to be able to establish their control over the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? Okay, so I want to say a few things, and then I'm going to give you some things to take a look at. Okay, and so it will be interactive. But I'll give you the basis. The personage who's deemed responsible for the establishment of what becomes known as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. His full name is Abdul-Aziz bin Abdul-Rahman ibn Faisal al Saud. Okay? Sometimes just simply referred to as Ibn Abdul-Aziz. Okay? Or Ibn Saud. Okay, so Abdul-Aziz bin Abdul-Rahman bin Faisal al Saud. Okay? He's the first king of Saudi Arabia. He establishes the House of Saud, as it's sometimes called, as being ruler of what becomes known as Saudi Arabia. It wasn't an easy task. It wasn't an easy task by any circumstance. So he was born in the Najd. And Saudi Arabia has two, as far as the kingdom is concerned, has two major areas. The Najd, which is the eastern portion of the country, and the Hijaz, which is the western part of the country. Now, looking back at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, which part do you think it was that the Prophet ﷺ was born into? The Najd or the Hijaz? And it's an easy way to answer that question if you think about a certain specific aspect about the kingdom, even in present day.
The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I believe, is from the Hijaz.
Hijaz, why would you say that, Imam Radi?
Well, based on a hadith where the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is recorded to have said, "Beware of your Najd." And most of the Arabs, as I understand it, believe that people that come from the Najd will create the biggest problems in Islam.
Okay.
I would think that the Prophet wasn't from that area.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. So, good point. But is there another reason to look at and know, to determine where the Prophet ﷺ came from? That this question was put for you again, and Imam Radi didn't come with the hadith, which is sound. Is there anything else that we know that will point to the fact that the Prophet ﷺ was from the Hijaz? This is like a geographical question almost. You're making it more difficult than it is. Okay, let me put it in this way, okay? For Muslims, the two most holiest sites are located where? What are they?
Hijaz.
Say that again.
Medina. Hijaz.
Mecca and Medina. Where, in which one of the two was the Prophet born, sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
Hijaz. He born Mecca.
Mecca. So, even as Jazakallah khair, Imam Radi, for bringing forth that hadith, a very simple answer to the question is, he was born in the Hijaz. Why? Because he was born in Mecca. Okay, and when it came time to make the second hijrah, the one that is talked about more often than the first, he goes to Medina, and he's still in the Hijaz. Okay, so give you some information that most people don't talk about this aspect. One of the things that leads to this, the hadith that Imam Radi talks about, is we have to draw the differentiation between the types of people that inhabited what will become Saudi Arabia. They were Arabs, no doubt. But in the Hijaz, because of Mecca and Medina, and their involvement in the overland trade, historians refer to these areas being sedentary areas, and that the individuals who were there, who were housed there, were sedentary in Mecca and Medina and other places. And the trade that they were involved in allowed this to be a reality, as opposed to in the Nejd, for most of the individuals who lived in the Nejd, you will hear this word in Arabic, Bedu, okay? Bedouin, nomadic. And keep this in mind, because as we get to the point about the establishment and what Ibn Abdulaziz ibn Saud has to do it, this aspect of Bedouin versus sedentary individuals within this struggle for control of the kingdom, the area that will become known as Saudi Arabia, becomes really important. So Abdulaziz bin Abdurrahman ibn Faisal al Saud was born in Riyadh in 1890. I have some pictures that if I could show them, could show you just how desolate a place Riyadh looked like, even in the 1920s and 30s. Upstairs, I'm not sure. I'll show them next time. No, that's okay. Okay. You know, that to show you in that, okay? In the Nejd, the family that is opposing the Sauds for control of the Nejd are the Rashidis. Okay, now when I was in the kingdom and talked to some individuals, the Saud family is said to have migrated into eons ago into what is Saudi Arabia from Iraq. Okay, and they came in, and this is, nobody really knows the time period, just from oral history and the lineage that they were known in Iraq, migrated into the kingdom and settled. And they settled in a place called Dir'iyah. Dir'iyah. And so this becomes a stronghold for them. Now, they do play an important role in the aspects of Islam in the kingdom, because Muhammad ibn Abdul-Ahad, rahmahullah, when he's chased out of the Hijaz, he finds refuge with Muhammad al-Saud in Dir'iyah. And Muhammad al-Saud in that area is strong enough and has enough forces to give protection and sanctuary to Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahhab. And this is an extremely important move that happens here. Okay, this is before, the time, and we'll get back to take a look at that. So, one of the things that happens to the Saud family is that in their struggles with the Rashidis, they don't do so well. And they end up leaving Saudi Arabia itself, what becomes Saudi Arabia, and going to Kuwait. And they're there for some time. Okay? In 1890, at the age of 10, that's when Saud followed his family into exile. they lost enough territory and supporters that the safest thing for them to do was to leave, and they go into Kuwait. He spends the rest of his childhood in Kuwait. In 1901, at the age of 21, he succeeds his father to become leader of the Saud family. His father, his name is Abdul-Rahman bin Faisal, who dies. And so now he is the son who becomes leader of the Saudi family. Even though he's outside of the kingdom, he is looked upon as being, he has the title of being, quote unquote, the Sheikh of the Najd, or the Sultan of the Najd. Okay? Hasn't come back under his control yet, but that's coming. So, everybody has access to the computer? They can go on to, they can look up stuff. You all there?
I have my phone.
Okay. Sheikh Nutar, do you have access to the internet to be able to look up things?
No, Imam Sheikh, no, Imam Sheikh, I do not.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
So, Imam Radi, it's on you. So I want you to look up a certain building, Masmak Castle. Sometimes it's spelled capital M-A-S-M-A-K, Masmak Castle.
You want to spell that again, Sheikh? What was that?
Capital M-A-S-M-A-K, Masmak. That's one of the ways it can be spelled.
Siri, find M-A-S-M-A-K Castle.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get that. She said she didn't get that.
Okay.
Masmat Castle.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Try tapping above to edit.
Let me see. With the speed that I'm going, it probably would have been better if you just went on and told us.
Okay, I will. Okay. Masmak Castle. If you were a tourist, now because
Assalamualaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. If you were going to the
They
kingdom,
have it on the,
yes?
they have it as a fortress,
Okay.
and it's in the old city of Riyadh.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Mhm.
Of course, I can't get more than that right here because I'm walking.
Okay. Okay. But thank you for that. Jazakallah here. I'll take it from there. Okay. Masmak Fortress, Riyadh. In 1902, young Abdulaziz ibn Saud, and with about 50 followers total, they sneak into Riyadh and they capture or recapture the fortress, Masmak Fortress, also called Masmak Castle. If you travel to Riyadh, sightseeing or otherwise, or working there, this castle has been kept in its original condition. And one of the things that happens is that you see there's a door leading into the castle, and there is a spearhead, the point of a spear lodged in the door jamb. And the story is that when the Rashidis found out the guard at this particular gate figured out what was happening, one of Abdulaziz ibn Saud's men threw a spear and it lodged in the door jamb, keeping the door open. And they couldn't close the door, and he and his men went in, and surprising the Rashidis, they recaptured the fortress, ultimately being able to take Riyadh. And this allowed Abdulaziz ibn Saud to gain favor amongst many of the other tribes in the kingdom. And this is the first step in establishing, hold on for just a minute. Excuse me for just a minute.
Who's that?
Mr. Reed.
Okay.
Give me just a minute.
Mhm. Mhm.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Walaikum assalam.
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum assalam. Oh, my nose is running.
Hello. Walaikum salam.
What happened? No, I'm already in the meeting. Okay, is everybody there? I'm back. So Abdulaziz ibn Saud, he recaptures the city. And this sets up what will commence to be the recapturing and establishment of Saudi power. But something intervenes in the course of this. And what intervenes is World War I. So by the time the war comes about, he's pretty much reestablished Saud control in the Nejd, and it continues to expand. But now there's going to be a problem, because Ibn Rashid, the leader of the Rashidis, he appeals to the Ottoman Empire for assistance in defeating Abdulaziz ibn Saud and the Ottomans send troops to Arabia, puts Ibn Saud on the defensive. June 15, 1904, the Saudis suffer a major defeat. But his forces he's able to reconstitute his forces. And part of the way he does this is that the Turkish troops there have to limit their offensive because of supply problems. So getting back to this aspect about Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahhab, he's granted sanctuary by Abdulaziz ibn Saud's, forerunner. And his practice of Islam spreads throughout the Nejd. Now the question becomes, and people have talked about, yeah, is that, you know, this guy, Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahhab, what was he? Some people criticize him, you know, and others say that he give him the title of Mujaddid. But in the Najd, his message catches hold, you know, to the extent he marries into the Saud family. And to this day, within the Saud family, there is a division, not one in terms of being a problem, but just in terms of lineage. You have those who are the descendants of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and they are referred to in Arabic as Ahlul Sheikh, or the people of the Sheikh, meaning Muhammad Abdul Wahhab. One of my students that I had at the third school I was teaching at, Talia and I were invited to his house for dinner. And, you know, the brother, his wife was from the Ahlul Sheikh, from the people, you know, descended from Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. You know, so, and you have this, those who are concerned, like, you know, Ahlul Bayt are those, the people of the house, are those of the house of Saud, okay? Meaning Abdulaziz ibn Saud and that, okay, on that side. And then you have the, like I said, the Ahlul Sheikh, the people of the Sheikh, meaning the descendants of the marriage of when Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab marries into the Saud family, and from the unions and the descendants of that come down, okay? Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab is a very interesting person because he gets chased all over the kingdom. Historically, what we have to recognize is that by the time he makes his appearance, he's born, Muhammad Abdul Ahad was born in 1745. And by the time he becomes an adult, his father is a judge, recognized as a scholar in the Najd, in the Hijaz. But one of the things is by this time, the very things that the Prophet ﷺ had fought against, taught against, wiped out, had crept back into the Hijaz and other areas. So you find out, for example, one of the things that happened to Muhammad Abdul-Ahad in a particular village that he goes to, he cuts down this tree and the people become incensed. He cut down the tree because people were in essence worshiping this tree, so to speak. Women who would become pregnant and wanted to try to ensure that they would have boys as opposed to girls would take parts of their clothing and pin it onto this tree. And Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab cut the tree down. The people rose up against him in doing so, and the person, he got chased out of this village. And this happens repeatedly to him. In doing so, people have become involved in things that definitely have been forbidden by the Prophet ﷺ. And then historically, a lot of Western historians look at him and say, well, the type of Islam that he was practicing was puritanical. And we have to be careful about accepting such a definition as that, because from the things that I know, and one of my teachers wrote a 750-page book on the life of Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, and there was nothing pointing to the fact about being puritanical, that what he called to was a return to the proper practice of Islam as given by Allah and by the Prophet ﷺ. And there were people who didn't want to do that. People who, whether they were princesses or head of tribes, he gets chased from one place to another until he ends up at Diriyah, this area right outside of Riyadh, where the House of Saud has been established now, and he's given sanctuary. So by the time Abdulaziz ibn Saud gets to the point of being king in the family, this is, Muhammad ibn Abdul-Ahad and the Ahlul Sheikh, the people of the Sheikh, are well interwoven into the Saud family. Okay, so World War One. By the fact that the Rashidis go to the Ottomans for help against Abdulaziz ibn Saud, it allows for something else to happen. On the Allied side, because America is not in the war in 1914, it's the British who are Germany's main opponent. Okay? And the British come up with the idea because they want to make sure, they want to end Ottoman influence and control in the Arabian Peninsula, because by this time, the Ottoman Sultan is being referred to as the protector of the two holy mosques. Okay? He's allied, or the Rashidis are allied with them. So Abdulaziz ibn Saud becomes an ally of the British to fight against the Rashidis. Okay? Now, what has happened during the course of talking about these events, the actions of Abdulaziz ibn Saud during World War I aren't really paid that much attention to because of something else that's happening in the Hijaz. Can someone tell me who the personage is that is in the Hijaz that a lot of attention gets paid to, looking at the course of World War I as it's carried out in the Arabian Peninsula? And he's not Arab. I'll give you that hint. But nonetheless, extremely important.
It would be Lawrence.
Yes, T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. Okay? Now, the British seek out Sharif Hussein of Mecca in the Hijaz to be an ally in fighting against the Ottomans. The way T.E. Lawrence is talked about, he becomes known as Lawrence of Arabia. They would have you think that he was the only British intelligence officer that was sent to the Arabian Peninsula to enlist the aid of the people there against the Ottomans and against the Axis powers. But actually, he wasn't by himself. There was a team of individuals sent to the Nejd to talk to Abdulaziz ibn Saud, and there was a group sent to the Hijaz to talk to the Sharif Hussein of Mecca. Okay? And T.E. Lawrence is a very strange individual, especially when you read the biography that was written about him and his life. He was fluent in Arabic. He was considered an Arab specialist, working as a British foreign officer then, it might as well say as an intelligence person. And if these were the reasons, he had a great love for the area, these were the reasons that he was sent to the Hijaz. And he's successful in securing the aid of Sharif Hussein of Mecca, and as well as other tribes who follow the Sharif Hussein of Mecca's lead. And they're very successful in warring against the Turks and taking care of the one train line that still is only one train line that goes, out of the kingdom into that you can take from the kingdom into Istanbul, that's there, that was built by the Turks. So a lot of success there. But Ibn Saud, he receives a stipend of money from the British. And in doing that, he agrees to continue to fight against the Rashidis, who, making a long story short, he finally deals with them. But now there's another problem. he's not settled with the aspect of just being in control of the Najd. What Abdulaziz ibn Saud wants to be is controller of the Najd and the Hijaz. And if that's going to happen, this means he's going to have to fight the Sharif Hussein of Mecca. So basically what takes place here, just as it did in China after World War II, when Mao Zedong of the communists and Chiang Kai-shek of the nationalist Chinese fight for control of China. And Chiang Kai-shek, who the Americans are supporting, loses, and they end up on the island of Formosa, now present-day Taiwan, that there's some problems, and that's another story that that's taking place. But you have a civil war here. And yes, it's Muslim against Muslim. Muslim blood is being shed to see who will ultimately control the Najd and the Hijaz. Okay, so in 1912, Abdulaziz ibn Saud has control of the Najd. And as is stated from my notes, quote, the British government attempted to cultivate favor with Ibn Saud, but generally favored his rival Sharif Hussein ibn Ali, leader of the Hijaz, who they fought with constantly. So December 1915, the British enter into a treaty with Abdulaziz ibn Saud, and the British established the House of Saud as a protectorate. In exchange, Ibn Saud pledged to again make war against Ibn Rashid, who was an ally of the Ottomans. So a slick move. One of the things you'll find out about Abdulaziz ibn Saud, he never went to a formal school in terms of training or education or anything like this, but he was a master politician. Franklin Delano Roosevelt made a statement about him when they met during World War II. He said that he was thankful that Abdulaziz, after negotiating with him on certain points, he was thankful that Abdulaziz ibn Saud was the king of Saudi Arabia and not a Republican, because he would have a hard time defeating him in an election. So he wasn't, quote unquote, as some would have liked to have said, excuse the expression, a dumb Arab. He was pretty skillful and pretty astute in what he was about doing. But being a protectorate under the British had its advantages. Ibn Saud buys his time before taking on the Rashidis and the Najd to get rid of them. He gets a steady supply of weapons and cash, 5,000 pounds at the time per month, supplied by the British. That was a lot of money then. Even by the day's terms, it's even a large amount of money. He told the British that what they were giving him was inadequate for him to make the type of military offensive against the Rashidis that they wanted. They get more weapons, and in 1920, over a 2-year period, 1922, the Rashidis are crushed. And so now Abdulaziz ibn Saud has control of all of the Najd. The tribes within it swear allegiance to him. He keeps the British money coming in until 1924. And during this next 2 years, there's constant battles with Sharif Hussein of Mecca. Now, it's important to note, we're going to break away from Abdulaziz ibn Saud for a minute, to look at this situation with T.E. Lawrence and Sharif Hussein of Mecca. Imam Radi, look up something called the McMahon Correspondence.
McMahon,
McMahon.
how do you spell that?
I think they're going to spell it capital MC, then capital AHON.
Oh, McMahon, okay.
Uh-huh. Correspondence.
All right. What is it? What are you saying? Correspondence?
Correspondence. McMahon correspondence.
That's a double A.
Capital MC, capital MAHON.
Oh, H-O.
If I'm spelling it correctly. It's been a minute.
Uh-huh. McMahon correspondence Tagalog.
Okay.
Does that sound reasonable? Let me see.
Mm-hmm. What does it say?
It's a series of letters that were exchanged during World War I, in which the government of the United States what's the file? Huh. It's in Wikipedia.
Okay.
It's a series of letters that were exchanged during World War I, in which the government of the United Kingdom agreed to recognize Arab independence after the war in exchange for the Sharif of Mecca launching the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire.
Yes.
The correspondence had a significant impact on Middle Eastern history during and after the war. A dispute over Palestine continued thereafter.
Mm-hmm. Now, thank you so much, Jazakallah. This McMahon correspondence, basically what is said there is that in specifics when you read it, Sharif Hussein of Mecca is told that if they are successful and the Allies win, and if they're successful in getting the Ottomans out of the Arabian Peninsula and aiding in the overall British strategic plan to defeat the Central Powers in that part of the world, that he will be made king of the Arabs. Okay, because the success with T.E. Lawrence and the those who fight for Sharif Hussein of Mecca, they don't just chase the Ottomans out of the Arabian Peninsula, they go all the way to Damascus. Okay, and so Syria is secured, the Arabian Peninsula is secured, Palestine is secured. Okay, and so what Sharif Hussein of Mecca is told in the correspondence in specifics is that if this is successful, he would be made king of the Arabs, and this huge Arab state would be put into place on which he would be the king of. Notice there's no mention about any discussion with Abdulaziz ibn Saud in this vein. This is an agreement between the Brits and Sharif Hussein of Mecca. And what happens is at the Treaty of Versailles, Britain backs out. Okay? They forget that this is the agreement that had been made. And T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, will spend the bulk of his life after World War I trying to get the British government to reconsider and keep their promises to the Sharif Hussein of Mecca. Now, Britain, on the other hand, there's another document. It's called the Balfour Declaration, capital Balfour, Balfour Declaration, that plays a part in some of the shenanigans that go on. Imam Radi, can you find that for me, please? Balfour is capital Balfour, Balfour Declaration.
The Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War, announcing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people.
Right.
In Palestine.
In Palestine.
Then an Ottoman region with a small minority population.
Okay.
So it was in the hands of the Arabs. The Ottomans lost the war.
Yep.
And that's how we got Israel.
Yep. So this so again, you know, so now when Sharif Hussein of Mecca is not given what had been promised to him and this guy McMahon is a British foreign secretary. Okay. I mean, he's not some lightweight. He has, you know, has a pretty powerful position. And but there was no intent to ever keep the promise to make him king of the Arabs. And so that area that he would have been king of would have included Syria. It would have included Palestine. It would have included what became Lebanon, as well as the Arabian Peninsula. You know, if he could have, you know, but he still would have had to come to some type of agreement or defeat Abdul-Aziz ibn Saud, because he wasn't going to accept that aspect of it. Okay.
It's 3 o'clock.
So to put this last point in, there's consistent battles between Sharif Hussein of Mecca after this point and Abdul-Aziz ibn Saud. One of the problems that Abdul-Aziz ibn Saud has is that most of his forces are Bedouin. He never knows from one day to the next just how many warriors or soldiers he's going to have. Okay, doesn't. Sharif Hussein of Mecca, on the other part, most of his troops, I remember we talked about, are secondary Arabs in the cities of, Mecca and Medina from surrounding areas. And he has a pretty stabilized force, especially after the aid and training that was given to them under the auspices of T.E. Lawrence and the other British operatives who were part of the team with T.E. Lawrence. Okay. So he has some advantages, and Abdul-Aziz ibn Saud has some disadvantages, and then something happens. Imam Radi, before we go, I want you to look up Al-Ikhwan, A-L, capital I-H-K-W-A-N, or the Ikhwan. Don't put Muslimin on the end of it. Just Al-Ikhwan.
How was that last word spelled? I-Q?
No, I-K-H-W-A-N. And if it doesn't show up, I'll go ahead and explain it.
All right. It's not Ikhwan.
What did you come up with?
Well, I would pronounce it Ikhwan.
Okay.
That's actually brotherhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
It says the Ikhwan, also Ahwan,
Mm-hmm.
was the first Saudi army made up of traditionally nomadic tribesmen, which formed a significant military force of the ruler Ibn Saud and played an important role in establishing him as ruler of most of the Arabian Peninsula in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. Okay. This is where the phrase about individuals being Wahhabis comes from, is this group.
Mhm.
These are practically all Bedouin. And something very strange happened shortly after World War I, leading into this conflict that will take place between Abdul-Aziz ibn Saud and the Sharif Hussein of Mecca. These individuals who are Bedouins, they settle in in settled areas. There are records in Kuwait of of the Bedouin tribes coming out of the Negev and selling their flocks, their camels, the sheep, the goats, and returning back into these settlements. And the Al-Ikhwan, okay, are beyond ultra followers of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, to the point that they go beyond in terms of the Sharia in doing things. Okay, so for example, with the Al-Ikhwan, they practice a circumstance that if a person committed a sin, it wasn't enough for the person to be, to seek Allah's forgiveness. No matter what it was, they needed to be punished. Certain things they would say that if a person committed, that they should be put to death. They were very strident, okay? But what they gave Abdul-Aziz ibn Saud was a concentrated, stable, dependable fighting force that was zealous beyond all belief. And it's this force that Abdul-Aziz ibn Saud uses as a weapon to that in 1925, Sharif Hussein and his family and his forces are defeated. And this leaves Abdul-Aziz ibn Saud in control of the Nejd and the Hijaz. Now, we'll continue next week with the end of this, because ultimately, Abdul-Aziz ibn Saud will have to turn on the Ikhwan. Okay? And so, in many instances, there are things that are going on, and I'll give you one that forces his hand to have to deal with them. He puts, for Abdul-Aziz ibn Saud, the money brought in at Hajj was what made up his Baitul Mal primarily, in terms of government expenditures, so forth and so on. So in light of the Al-Ikhwan having, fought with him, so forth and so on, he puts many of them in important roles, and one of the most important roles that he gives them is the control of the Hajj. And it's a huge mistake. People coming to Hajj are set upon by the Ikhwan. If they're not dressed this way or dressed that way, this, that, and the other, they have a very wide-ranging definition about what is bid'ah. And what happens is that over 3 or 4 years' time, people become the population coming to the Hajj falls off. It falls off to the extent it forms causes a monetary crisis for Abdulaziz ibn Saud. That's one. Two, the British have been given control of Iraq. And if you look at old maps from the 20s and the 30s, what you will see is this diamond-shaped piece of territory between southern Iraq and the kingdom called the neutral zone. What the British have Abdulaziz ibn Saud agree to is that they tell him, look, every year in the spring, quote unquote, the Bedouin tribes out of the Nejd raid into Iraq. And that's going to stop. So this is the neutral zone. You have to keep them out of here. And when Abdulaziz ibn Saud tells the leaders, the primary leaders of the Ikhwan, that they can't do that anymore, they resist and decide to do it anyway. Okay? The end result is, in 1 year, and I'll get the year for you next time, that they raid into Iraq, the British send forces, not tanks, but motorized vehicles, to chase them back into the kingdom. And what Abdulaziz ibn Saud does, he uses the forces who are loyal to him, that aren't members of the Ikhwan, as a blocking force. And the Ikhwan get caught between the British, pushing them back into the kingdom, and Abdulaziz ibn Saud's forces, and their power is broken. Okay, now, Abdulaziz ibn Saud, being the politician that he is, outside of this circumstance, he gets agreements of loyalty and obedience from the survivors of this operation to obey him, okay, and to be loyal. When I was in Riyadh, you could always tell, because some of these men, at the time I was in the 80s, they were old then, okay, in their 80s, some in their 90s. You could always tell them amongst any other Saudi by what they wore. And then I'll give you an idea about what I meant by their aspect about what considered to be bid'ah. The black circular thing that you see Saudis wear over their gutra is called an agal. Okay? And while there weren't that type that you see now, if you look at pictures of Abdulaziz ibn Saud and you see what he has around his gutra and others, these are the agals that they wore. You would never see a member of the Ikhwan wear that over their gutra. What they wore was an imama, a turban, white cloth wrapped around the gutra. This designated them. Anywhere you saw anybody in Riyadh wearing that, and you would see them gathered in, traveling in groups. King Fahd was king when I got to Saudi, and any number of times on the TV, on news broadcasts, they would talk about him going to different cities in the Nejd and meeting with these individuals, al-Ikhwan, and some of them still alive or their descendants, because they still they had a very special place at the time within the kingdom, and in terms of it becoming the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Okay, so this was extremely important. Okay, but it came to a point that Abdulaziz ibn Saud had to deal with that circumstance, and he did, in doing so. Okay, and it's also during this time, the aspect of World War I, that we get to begin to find out about his sons, because the Saudi family has over 10,000 members in it. And how does this come to pass? So the next time we meet, we'll look at the sons and daughters that Abdulaziz ibn Saud had, and how it came about that those referred to as the Sudairi 7 ended up after Abdulaziz's death, holding all of the most powerful positions in the kingdom. And this, again, is some things that we need to know about and to see and understand in light of current things that have happened. Okay? Any questions at all?
Yeah, Sheikh. I was wondering if, because I didn't want to interject this. This is one of the biases that I have against not so much Abdul-Wahab,
No,
but some of the followers.
no.
Are you going to talk about that marriage between Saud and Abdul-Wahab?
Yeah.
Aside from the marriage, I'm talking
Right.
about with regard to the politics, the
Yeah.
religious position.
Absolutely.
You'll get to that.
Yep.
Yeah, because one of the things that sticks in my mind is the so-called, the quote-unquote Wahhabis
Right.
were responsible for over 1 million deaths of Muslims who were basically Sufi. They had differences,
Right.
practices with regard to the way the Wahhabi
Now,
used
well,
to.
you know what the Wahhabi that you're talking about are the Ikhwan, and I can give you one. You know, in I will come back to it and go even deeper, but I can give you one example of, you know, in specifics of what you're talking about. Okay, if you go into the Hijaz, and you go into where the Prophet ﷺ was, the children stoned him so bad till he had blood in his socks, in Taif. Okay. When Abdulaziz ibn Saud enters into Mecca at the head of his forces, practically all the residents of Mecca have fled. They've left, and they fled because of the reports that they have about what happened in Taif when Taif fell to Abdulaziz ibn Saud's forces, who were primarily al-Ikhwan, who will become known as Wahhabis. When the Ikhwan go into Taif, they kill over 750 people. Not only soldiers, men, women, and in some cases children. And when this filters down to Mecca, the people, and they heard that that Abdulaziz ibn Saud's forces are on the way, and they know that the majority of them are al-Ikhwan, they flee the city because of that. So yeah, I'm definitely going to talk about it. Okay. They arbitrarily killed over 700 people in Taif, and even to this very day, if you go into Taif, some people still will get exceedingly upset because they had family members who were killed by the Ikhwan when Taif fell. Okay, so yeah, definitely going to talk about it, no doubt. Okay, no doubt. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Sheikh Mukhtar?
Yes, I have. Imam said this is very interesting. So you can see a lot. But Imam Wahab, what he wrote basically, what they teach in school, the Thalathatul Rasul and the Kitab al-Tawheed, what he taught basically was very good. Very, very good.
Right. But
right. It wasn't him. He wasn't the problem.
Yeah, it was his followers.
It was his followers.
Right. That's what I'm saying. That's the point. That's the point I'm trying to make. That his followers.
Yeah.
That was he taught.
Yeah.
That was he taught.
So like we're saying again, his the aspect of the charges laid against him, when you look at what he said and what he was talking about, he wasn't the problem.
Oh.
And what he was calling people to is his followers, like the Ikhwan and these individuals who became in the most negative sense about the Wahhab using that name. And they shouldn't use his name to describe them, okay? Because he would have adamantly objected to the things that they were doing. Okay.
I think I think it's a very unfair rap.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as he's concerned. As far as his followers are concerned, oh, they went way over any aspects about following the Quran and the Sunnah. Way over.
That's right.
Way over.
This is interesting. I love this course. This is interesting.
Way over. So
yes.
we'll stop there. I mean, unless you have any more questions or comments, definitely appreciate you all coming. I look forward to the time. Jazakallah here for letting me be able to share this time with you and talk about these things. Because as we get along further, just for the point that Imam Radi makes, okay, what people don't want to talk about is the lasting influence that, quote unquote, those individuals with the doctrine of, quote unquote, the Wahhabis have had on the kingdom in the modern times. And they say that they're following Imam Abdul-Ahad. No. A lot of the things that you see and some of the extremes just amongst people, just amongst the common people following that line of thinking becomes crazy. When right before we left, and Talia may correct me, right after we left, you had an individual, his wife was in childbirth. She needed a cesarean section. Okay? The doctor, male, does a cesarean section, delivers the baby, the mother's fine and the baby is fine. Do you know the father went home, got a gun, and came back and shot the doctor?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Shot the doctor because he said he had, quote unquote, embarrassed him by looking at his wife and delivering the baby.
I feel
And then Mama Tilla has talked about another one. The guy let his daughter drown in the swimming pool because she was swimming. Because they were in the water. These are some of the outgrowth of what Imam Radi is talking about. Okay? The other one, again, which Imam Ibn Abdul-Wahhab, it cannot be laid at his feet. A person actually said that if a woman goes into the ocean, she's committed zina. Why? Because she's feminine and the water falls under the aspect of being masculine in terms of a noun. These are the type of extremes and nonsense that the quote unquote, those called Wahhabis in that sense did. And so you can imagine if they're in control of the Hajj.
They killed over 1 million people.
Yes. But Imam Saif, now you brought a very interesting, if I may count my lay, I know you're trying to finish up, right? If I may add something here. Most of those, you said Bedouins. And from my, I know if you can count a lot of Bedouins, they cannot read or write. They're illiterate. They can't even read or write.
No, a lot of them can't.
They cannot read or write.
At the time. At the time, in that sense, but they were, way beyond extreme.
Yes.
Way beyond extreme.
You're right.
And again, not favoring them, but in the context of what Ibn Abdulaziz was trying to achieve, they gave him what he had lacked. They gave him what he had lacked, just as Imam Radi read the description about them. They gave him what he lacked and allowed him to accomplish the aspect of becoming in control of the Najd and the Hijaz, and then spreading elsewhere to where the kingdom, gets to the boundaries of Yemen and elsewhere. Okay?
Very interesting.
Yep.
Very good. Very good. Excellent.
Alhamdulillah. So next week, inshallah, same time, same place, same channel.
Yeah, inshallah.
Inshallah ta'ala. Jazakallah khair. Alhamdulillah.
See you tonight, man. Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Ramadan